Let's take a look at the City Council recap for July 24th, 2025 for Just an Average Citizen. Be informed, be educated, be empowered. So there were no proclamations or recognitions for part one this meeting, so we're just going to move to part two and talk about the consent agenda. And on the consent agenda, there's resolutions and ordinances. Resolutions are just what helps the city function in the day-to-day items that need city council approval. There were actually 5 resolutions presented. One was for social media services, for funding for the communications department. There was some funding for some water infrastructure at Fort Phantom. There was also utility relocation design plans created and funded for some parts of I-20. There was also police facility cameras and equipment purchase for some different items. The last thing was a resolution for professional services because of the cyber attack through the IT department. And so those were items all passed on approval. The next item of the next section of the consent agenda are the 3 ordinances, and ordinances are laws that usually have a first and a final reading. The first reading is in the consent agenda, so these will be on the final reading in regular agenda at the next council meeting. The 3 ordinances were 2 conditional use permits, or what's called a CUP, for some freight containers behind some businesses, and then there was 1 zoning change for multi-family housing on the north side of town. And that wraps up the consent agenda. Part 3 is the regular agenda, and that's the part of the meeting that most people see or hear information from. It involves anything that requires a public hearing or presentation or possible discussion. There are only 2 items we're going to focus on during the regular agenda for this particular meeting. One was on the public hearing and discussion on modifying year-round water management. And so there was a robust discussion that I think centered around this particular point.
The fundamental thing here is collective good and the individual liberty, right? And where do you want to sit in that spectrum?
Okay, so here's your takeaway as a citizen. The decision is between the collective good, which is maintaining the restrictions on the different water stages that they, I guess, have the liberty to do as a council, or giving the citizens back their individual liberty to have freedom to use water as they see fit. And the water management system is saying we should be able to use water in more capacity than we have because the water levels are great, are doing better in the lake. They're past that trigger stage. And so what should concern you is that the city council decided to go with the collective good, which is more like socialism than going with individual liberties, which is what a constitutional republic is. And we need to be aware of these decisions because these are not necessarily just a one-off decision or a decision that affects one thing. It kind of filters how they view lots of different areas, and it's something to be very understanding of how a person sees something so that you know when you elect them what you're getting. And I feel like we kind of got a bait and switch on this particular topic because it's not their job to monitor above and beyond what the trigger mechanism is in place. And I think Brian Yates describes it well.
And as it's written, there is actually a lot of engineering and science behind the way Abilene did that analysis. I think you just trust that. So I'm comfortable with going back to 3 days a week. That doesn't mean people have to water 3 days a week. It's just they can if they feel like they need it. If they're more conservation minded and want to do it just once a week, which is the recommendation, that'd be great. But I don't think we necessarily need to readdress or re-examine the plan as it's written. I think we just let the plan go as it's already approved.
Moving to the next item on the agenda is the BYOB business ordinance that we need to kind of break down and unpack it a little bit. Here's what Lynn Beard had to say.
And I just don't think we have a good sense of who this is, how many entities in town is this really going to affect? Right. And at what percentage of those are really causing problems?
It came out of a result of an incident that happened in a location in town where there were deaths involved by one particular, under the control of one particular organizer. And so what someone in the city decided, I don't know if it's a chief or the mayor, decided that there needed to be a swift response due to public safety. And they came up with this ordinance that was going to pass under public safety considerations, which is a little concerning because it was one incident. It wasn't a mass, there wasn't a lot of incidences across the city that it was creating a need for a response. It was a response to one particular deadly incident, unfortunately. So thankfully the council kind of said, let's scrap it and start again. And so they came back with this trigger mechanism that's like an ordinance that if you follow the law or the ordinance, then you'll be allowed to continue life as usual. It's those who are going to break the law. But what we've found is they discovered there's a larger BYOB business group in the city operating, and it's really causing a lot of headache and frustration for them because they're not doing anything wrong. It's this one particular individual that has ceased to do the BYOB activity. And so I think Shane Price really does a good job explaining why this is not a good approach to this isolated incident.
I just feel like we've got a finishing nail, we've got one problem, and we've got this sledgehammer that we're coming at it with it, and we're going to hurt everything around it. And that's just my perspective, but this is a.
So part 3 is continued after executive session, and it was a pretty short executive session, so I'm not really sure what all was discussed, if anything, or what specific items they had on their agenda, because the public is not privy to that information. There is a list of things that could be considered, but we don't really know what specific things they're dealing with. I will say that after executive session, the city attorney requested 2 more additional assistant municipal judges to help in case of the main municipal judge being absent. The only issue I have with that is, we don't know how much salary those 2 judges will be getting, assistant judges, and the information was not presented even in a presentation slide or even in the packet, the names of these 2 new judges. So you had to be there present and catch the names that were mentioned very quickly, and I just don't think that's necessarily the best path forward and being transparent and open so citizens can know what's going on. Real quickly, I want to mention the board resolution appointments because I think it's important for you to know what citizens are serving on what boards and to make you aware that there's capacity. In fact, I think it's the one way the city considers engaging with the public by appointing private citizens on these public boards. And so I think it's important for you to know who's being appointed. Betty Hardwick is a board that the city doesn't run, but it's got people who they can appoint onto it. Rosinda Contreras is a reappointment. And then the Landmarks Commission has Derek Hood, which is a new appointment, and he apparently is a historical commission representative, which is a position that they fill on that board, I believe. And then lastly, Josh Black is a new and an alternate person who's been appointed to the Landmarks Commission. And there you have your board appointments. So the last 2 items on the regular agenda are the DCOA Economic Plan and Annual Budget presented by Misty Mayo. And she does a great job every year giving a really great presentation, helping not only the council, who's already had more discussions behind closed doors, because that's part of executive session, they understand what's going on, but she really tries to help engage with the public so that they can track what's going on. And one of the 2 highlights I want to point out is that 1 in 3 jobs that has been created in Abilene has had some way or form been touched, in some way or form has been touched by the DCOA. And I think that's really impressive numbers. And also for every dollar the DCOA invests in our city and future jobs and future businesses, we get a $45 or $47 return on that investment. So things are going really well for the DCOA. They've been really moving and shaking not only in larger businesses to bring them in, but also the businesses that are present in Abilene. I think she said of the 45 businesses they've helped create some kind of incentive plan or business plan, 30 of them were already located in Abilene. So keep paying attention to what the DCOA is doing because they are really helping expand our economic base so that we're not focused on one particular industry, but we have a good balance and a mix. And I think that we're starting to see some of the benefits of what has happened over the last 5 years. So that wraps up the regular agenda.